Good morning, Instagram. Good morning, TikTok. Well, my name is Larry Locken. You're tuned into the Larry Locken Show. I guess you could call it that. Typically, I do shows on YouTube and Instagram. And I'm getting a little bit more familiar with TikTok. I want to talk a little bit about the Vietnam War. I had completely spaced that it was the 50-year end of the war back in April. And I told a friend of mine that I was going to talk about this one time. It's not usually the kind of thing I cover, but I'm going to start off with talking about how the Vietnam War got started and where it went from there. I'll have a little bit different take on it. I'm not really trying to get into the political differences of the war or anything like that. It was a war that lasted a long time. I know, for instance, with my parents, it took them practically from learning their ABCs to pushing 30. So this thing, well, first of all, Vietnam was under the French control for quite a while. Okay, so, you can go through I'm not going to read all the rigmarole and all that shit. In 1954, the Geneva Conference temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, with the Communist North and the U.S. back south. Of course, keep in mind this goes on to become the first proxy war ever fought in our modern incarnation. Elections were tried to reunify the country. It didn't happen, and actually it was reported too, I remember hearing that Ho Chi Minh in the North came to the United States first and asked them to help set up a government. Well, the U.S. basically told them to go pound sand, so they went to the Russians. Well, one thing led to another. We started sending military advisors over there to South Vietnam. There were little skirmishes that started, around 1955. Things of that nature. What really got this war kicked into gear, though, really high gear, was the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August of 64. Alleged attacks on U.S. destroyers led Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, giving the president broad war-making powers. Boy, that sounds like right after 9/11, don't it, huh? Yeah, that sounds familiar. The Gulf of... Yeah, well, who knows? Who knows what's up with that, right? Either way. Either it was legit and it led into a bunch of bullshit, or it was planned and it led into a bunch of bullshit. Either way, there was a bunch of money made on the war, and we know that, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. Following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, there was attacks on U.S. bases in South Vietnam. President Johnson authorized sustained bombing campaigns, and in March of 65 committed the first U.S. combat troops to Vietnam. Wow. Well, and here we go. Let's see. I'm going through some of my notes here. So 65, it gets kicked into gear, okay? So now we're going to go to the next phase of this war. What I want to really get into is the money trail here and the drugs and and what it did for our culture and how it, there's might be a silver lining at the end of this, I'm hoping, at some point. So Vietnam was kept going basically all these years for financial profit. Yeah, I mean, they were making money hand over fist. Everybody was. Soldiers got in on the act too. They had a big, like with every conflict, there's always a black market. A need for things over the black market. But the heroin, the drugs really became to the forefront, to the point where the United States was actually flying them in for the soldiers. They were flying them in there, but at the same time having complete deniability. Oh, no, it wasn't them. They have no idea how they're getting onto that island or anything, en masse. So it's so dirt cheap that, they're practically being given away, right? And it's 95% pure heroin versus the shit they had back here on the streets, which was 5% at the time. I know this, my dad's best friend at the time was injured 3 times over there, and he came home each time. Okay, he could have stayed home every single time, but he kept going back over there. You know why? Because of the heroin. Because the heroin was so good. It was pure, right? And it was dirt cheap versus over here, 5% versus 95% and like an arm and a leg. Yeah. So he kept going back over there, and then the 4th time it finally got him, he stepped on a landmine and died. Yeah. It was a tragic war. The costs they're immeasurable. This is without the black. Of course, there's always a black budget. We know this, right? But this is what they'll even admit to. It was about a $5 million a day undertaking, okay? And that's about $50 million in today's money. Okay, every day. Every single day for weapons. You're talking $4 million of that a day was for weaponry. Paying the weapon contractors, right? Okay. It was kept going and going and going for money, basically. We know this. I mean, I'm not telling anybody something they don't already know, but... and I think everybody started to get their hands in the cookie jar. The drug operation was just phenomenal. They say that 35 to 50% in some outfits during the peak of the drug epidemic over there, the guys were on heroin. I don't doubt it. It was probably higher. I mean, that cheap, that good, that shit's... Can you only imagine? I mean, it was a little bit of heaven in a hell where they were at, okay? And then I know they tried saying that... a U.S. official was quoted as saying that the morale had really slipped by the time the early 70s was rolling around. They said that the morale was really going down over there, and that was why they were losing ground, to North Vietnamese forces, because the morale was slipping. The morale was slipping because of the drug use. Well, this was the same guy that was part of the team that was flying the fucking shit in there for the soldiers to have, for one. And two, no, if anything, that heroin was keeping them going. I mean, if it wouldn't have been for that heroin over there would have probably been a lot more friendly fire. That shit was escalating. It was tense. They were getting nowhere. The soldiers could see it, that it was bullshit. I mean, they were getting nowhere. They were getting no support, no backup. They were put in situations where... they were purposely outmanned and outgunned, okay? You're talking about an island nation over there, right? So you can use also, it can be used the excuse that, oh, well, the rebels just knew how to fight better. They knew their own territory. They were familiar with that jungle. The American soldiers weren't. Yeah, only problem with that is, though, after about 5 years of that shit, and as many troops as we were going through, you get to a point where you've got enough goddamn troops over there. I mean, you can only go so far on that fucking island. You know what I mean? I totally agree with that. That would be the case for years. But eventually, it's gonna wear down, okay? But they didn't want the war to end. They wanted to keep going, making that money. They were flying the heroin in there for these guys. It wasn't just that they were getting it through a back door and the U.S. government was turning a fucking blind eye to it because, the soldiers needed that, right? They were flying the shit in there. Okay, so that was going on, right? And just back home, you will hear in a lot of nostalgia situations as far as life during that war here that lasted forever and a fucking day. Like I said, it took my parents from their ABCs to almost the better part of 30. You will hear that it divided dinner tables and it was a division. Yes, it was. If you had some affiliation with the military, you had been in the military, like maybe the parent had been in World War II, right? It was pro-war. And the kid was part of a activist movement at the college or at the high school or whatever, or that kind of thing, right? But most people during that time, like any other time, were working and trying to survive, too. It wasn't, we always have a habit of going back and glamorizing it. Shit, did those divisions happen? Absolutely. Between families, absolutely. Those stories are true. But that wasn't everybody, okay? That was, just like with anything. But it was a consciousness raiser in the fact that we went from a Leave It to Beaver type world to all of a sudden, people dressed with all kinds of weird colors that had never been seen before mixed. Long hair, new ideas, new consciousness-raising, projects that they were working on. But a lot of them, too, like with any other movement, right, a lot of them, too, were just interested in being down for a cause, right? They really didn't. They just, as long as there's something to protest, fuck it, I'm there. You know what I mean? Ronald Reagan, I can't stand the man personally. We're not going to get into that kind of shit, but I can't stand the man personally. But he said one thing one time that I really agreed with, that he was going into a speech when he was a governor of California, and there was a protest out front, and he came in there and he said that there was a guy holding a sign laying in the grass that said, "Make love, not war," but Ronald Reagan said, I don't think he was capable of doing either. And he was probably right, honestly, though, about that one thing, and I'm not a big fan of the man. But, so it was kind of a letdown. But then I have to think too that they didn't have the social networking that it's available now. The baby boomer movement, that hippie movement. Plus, things were moving so fast. I mean, we were coming out of Leave It to Beaver, mayonnaise, white bread. Everything was wonderful in the 50s if you were a white, middle class guy or older, or or above. Other than that, it wasn't that great it wasn't that golden of an era. Yeah, but like my dad and I always go back and forth because he grew up. Well, he graduated high school in '65, but he grew up in the '50s. He calls it the golden era. I said, Dad, yeah, because you were white, and a guy, and a male. If you would have been a female white person, or if you would have been of any other color, or yeah, I mean, it wasn't that wonderful. There was no social net, there was nothing. So it wasn't that wonderful, but for him it was, and you can always paint the reality like for everybody else it was, and they should have just thought so because you thought so. You know what I mean? So they can do that. But, the war started to really reach a high pitch. You get into the late 60s. 68 was really probably the bloodiest year of it. I think they had one battle alone where we lost 16,000 troops. So, and the things were changing back home too. The music was changing. The culture was changing. I mean, we were going from doo-wop to, psychedelic rock, right? Things flipped that quickly, right? Even the Beatles, they changed their image like overnight. Right, everything was it was flipping. About the time we get to 1967, we're starting to see that kind of model of how it's going to look for a little while, the American landscape. That Summer of Love, 67. Now, keep in mind that kind of look, though. People want to associate that kind of hippie look with the 60s, but really, mainstream America didn't start looking like that till about the 70s, around the turn of the decade, by the time they got into the 70s. So that's more of a 70s thing all the way around. Fashions weren't like they are now. They didn't just take off and they were everywhere because of social media. Back then, shit took a while, right? You'd see it on TV, yes, with the few channels you got, but, what was hip in California wasn't going to be hip till, other places for a while yet. So it took a while. It took a while. By the way, I see people wanting to be guests here. I'm going to have a requirement, though. I'm not. You'll be gone if you don't. There's one thing. Either you fought in the Vietnam War, either you had family that did. I don't really even give a shit about that part of it, but you know something about the war. If you're just coming on to say war is bullshit and all that, if you have something to offer about the war that's not just your opinion either. I mean, what do you know? Do you have family member that died in that war? Do you have family members? Do you have, was your old man in that war? Was your some of you kids are probably younger. Was your grandfather in that war, right? What have you heard about it? What do you know about it? And but fuck what you've heard about it. What have you studied about it? What do you know about it? All that, be prepared and, be prepared to make me sound like I'm a dipshit, which isn't hard to do as far as the subject goes, if you're going to come in. All right, so, yeah, I'll, as soon as the vibe's right, I'll pick somebody, but, yeah, don't come on to ask me if my refrigerator's still running, and if it is, I better go catch it, okay? Yeah, yeah, I've heard that one a time or two. So, it opened up, the way I kind of would sum up Vietnam, though, too, is it was a really big, probably the biggest hustle ever pulled off on, the Western world, as far as the money that was made on so many levels with it, in so many ways, right? And then, the war just kind of ran its course. I really don't give, even though I think it was just the sign of the times, I don't give, really, the hippie movement a lot of credit for it ending, and maybe about a year. I mean, it slowed it up a little, but people were just fatigued of it by that time. I mean, God, we'd been over there forever and a fucking day. A lot longer than any of us, unless you're, over, well, really 60 now that you can consciously remember being, which would have been the Vietnam War. So, yeah, it was a long time, and it just kind of had worn its course, and, but it raised a conscious level. Yeah, let's see, invite Maurice. All right, Maurice, man, I'm going to invite you in, but, dude, have something to say about the war, except for that it sucked and all this shit. Okay, I'm trying to hit the invite button. I don't know what the hell that's doing. I'm still new to TikTok, and I'll be 50 in August 1st, so I'm illiterate. So I was born a few months after we pulled our last troops out of there. Oh, it did send the invite. Okay, yeah, I must have had to hit it 55,000 times. 73 was the last time that any soldiers were deployed over there for the first time. 72, they decided to end the draft. 73, anybody that enlisted after, or that was set to go in after sometime in 73, they let him go ahead and take off if they wanted to. I remember a guy who was in boot camp during it, but he had signed up to go in. He had enlisted. So what they did was they said anybody that was drafted or signed up after this date, fall out, and then you had a chance to stay in, or you had a chance to go home, get your walking papers, and go home. Okay. So he was in there. That would have been about the fall of 72. No, he went in early 73. So it happened right at the time he happened to be in there, and they didn't draft anymore. They ended the draft because they knew that would have been one way to really keep the baby boomer movement strong. If they wouldn't have ended that fucking draft, they would have had bloodshed on their hands. The government would have. It could have gotten real bad. And, it's too bad it didn't, really, honestly, at the time. But, things calmed down. But even the government, even the controllers knew that, fuck, we got to get out of there. I mean, we got to figure out another ruse. So they went with the war on drugs. And, after that, Nixon started that, and Reagan kind of got his do not recall self hard about it. Yeah. But I can't hear anybody talk if anybody's talking. That's why. Okay, yeah, I'm still getting new to this. Okay, so that's kind of how we went. And where are we today from it? Well, I think today, it took a lot of years to start healing with a lot of families, but I really can't say it's really an issue anymore, even because most people that are conscious of that war are in their 60s or older. If you're younger than that, it's not much. It's when you were younger. Of course, you might have had a parent that was over there and was screwed up in the head. Here's another thing about the trauma that our soldiers went through over there, right? I wonder all the crazy shit that they saw, but then I wonder of it too, which doesn't get talked about enough. I wonder how much of it too was coming off of that heroin when they came back over here, too ashamed to say anything and then having to kick that stuff. When you're hooked on that kind of a heroin that's like that pure, even, my God, man, and as much as they were probably using, it's no wonder that some of them really went crazy after coming home, because you never really, you get over that, you quit that shit, and you kind of just learn to cope the rest of your life when you're on, most people, when you're on that high of a dose, unless you had Suboxone, which we didn't have then, right? They had methadone, but yeah, I don't know, methadone to me, just, I don't see what the difference is, just want more and more and more and more of it. But Suboxone, if it's used right, is really a miracle medicine. The problem is, though, some people aren't given enough of it when they go in to try to kick, or they try to take it right away. You should put yourself in withdrawal for about 8 hours to 24 hours. Just tough it out and then start taking it. But I wonder how much of that was due to that having to try to quit it with nothing over here, and then getting involved in it over here where it was really weak, and of course you couldn't smoke it or use it any other way. You'd have to shoot it with a needle back then until it started to get a little bit better on the streets here. Yeah, so I wonder if that was a lot of it too. I've always thought that maybe that was part of it, but not just that all the crazy fucking horrific shit they saw. But a lot of it to me, I think, had to be the drugs too, coming off of those. Because what a monster that would be. But, that one guy, again, I go back to that guy bitching about the morale, and it's the heroin when, he's one of the guys bringing it in there to begin with. But the morale stayed as high as it did probably so long because of it. It didn't drag anything fucking down. I mean, without that shit over there, the friendly fire, it would have been a free-for-all. It would have been terrible. So it was one of those things, and it was really a recipe for, it was like a perfect storm. Everything was kind of in that era. We were coming into a consciousness of raising new kind of a world, where it wasn't just, the mom stayed at home and had to be a slave and, pump out 25 kids because dad could go blow his load when he didn't have a romantic bone in his body. Women were not even allowed to get a credit card on their own until 1973. Well, that was most of the credit card company's policy. Okay, they had to have a man sign for it. I'm sure that there was exceptions, okay, I'd have no doubt, but I mean, still, I mean, it hasn't been that long ago. And, Leave It to Beaver was a really great time, like I said, if you were white and clueless. But, shit ain't like that, man. And thank God. So, and here's another fucked up thing about people. This is what I don't get, what isn't talked about. This is something people get miss the boat on this kind of shit all the time. Why in the fuck, you know how you see the NFL draft on TV, or the Major League Baseball draft, right, or whatever it might be, right, NBA draft? Guess what they had back then on primetime TV for a while? The draft to go into the fucking war. Oh, yeah, you had a certain number you had, and when you went to register, and if that number, I don't forget how they did it, if that number got called, they go like all, I don't know exactly how they did it. They would go from different districts around the country, and they would announce that these numbers needed to report to their recruiter's office. Yeah. So, yeah, they had the motherfucker, and I saw that, and I was asking my dad about it. He's like, yeah, I mean, but you never hear anybody talk about that. Is weird. That's some Orwellian shit right there. That is some motherfucking Orwellian shit, having the goddamn military draft on television like the NFL draft. Yeah, but people don't talk about it, man. I looked it up. It's true, though. You can find it. You can find it out there. It's not some hidden thing, but it's just nobody. I don't think they even try to hide that it happened. Of course, how could you? It's just that they don't think it's something that's. To me, that's a sicker and a bigger deal than most of the other shit that go along with that war. Is that we would have the draft on the nightly, however often they had it per week. Maybe it was once a week, I don't know. Kind of weird. I never knew it. I thought I was pretty well, schooled on the basics of the war as much as anybody was that didn't live it, or right? And then I saw that. This was probably, 10 or 15 years ago for the first time. Right, and I'd been studying about that war since I was a kid, because I knew people that were, I was born in 1975, so of course I knew people that were in that war. Right, that were older and had been over there. A whole shitload of people, of course, like anybody would have. And even though they probably didn't even know it, because not everybody came right out and told you they were in the Vietnam War. But a lot of them were. So, I thought I knew everything. I didn't know that, and I saw that they had that. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It doesn't surprise me, but that's the most Orwellian shit I've ever heard of. You want to talk about deep state? That's weirder than any kind of deep state bullshit, having the draft on television. Yeah, nothing speaks to, yeah, what a sensitive society. So, yeah, so they got rid of the draft, and it was pretty bad when back then the conservatives were real war hawks, and it was a conservative President Nixon that got rid of the draft. He had ran on that, and he fulfilled his promise and got rid of the draft. And I'm going to give him a little bit of credit, because he didn't have to fuck around with it either. He wasn't reelectable. I mean, he'd already won. He had won the second term already when he changed that, so he didn't have to follow through with his promise. He could have said, well, we can't because of this. I mean, it would have been an easy one to get out of, like they do with all of them. But I mean, that one especially. I mean, national security, all that, right? Yeah, so kudos to him for getting rid of that, right? So I can't say it was to get reelected, because he was not eligible again. He had just gotten his second term. So, but yeah, we probably would have been over there not very much longer had there not been an uprising at home a little bit. I mean, people were just sick of it and burnt out, but it probably would have only went about another year. They'd ran its course with it. There was all the money that they had been able to make off it. They kind of fleeced out, but they would play it off too on so many levels. Like, okay, well, we got to stop the spread of communism, right? And I can see, on a little island, you're gonna worry about a little island like that. But then you could also make the argument that if it starts there, it's gonna move elsewhere, right? So you can get people to buy into this Coca-Cola patriotism with it easily. Yeah, and I mean, it is an issue, but it was a proxy war, basically, and in our arrogance, I mean, we could have helped out the other side and, guided them not to be of that communist type of a mindset like they were, because that's what they wanted. They wanted our help. You know, I mean, we could have went that route and tried to make sure that his government, Ho Chi Minh's government, wasn't of that persuasion. But, you know, all these systems are really great if there's no greed or lust for human power in it, of course. I mean, capitalism, socialism, communism, every kind of fucking ism there is would be okay with people with integrity running it, with honesty. But in a society like that, you wouldn't need any of those isms at all. They'd all be wonderful with the right people running them, but you wouldn't need a label in that case. So, you know, whatever, but it was more of a principle, and a money maker. You know, same thing when the Russians went into Afghanistan in 79 to 87, and who knows, you know, the Russians had to have been getting a big payday out of that war, the Vietnam War too, of course, supplying the North. So it was a win-win, you know, it was really a win-win for everybody except for the soldiers that had to go over there, you know, and except for the people that had to make that decision to leave to go to Canada. I wouldn't have fought in that war. I would have fought in World War II in a second. Honestly, I totally would have. If I would have already been in the military, I would have fought in Vietnam, of course. If that was what I was already into, yes, the commitment. But I sure as fuck wouldn't have went to fight a corporate war. Now, and they call these people a draft dodger because they didn't go to Vietnam. You know, if you said that about other wars before that, but we haven't been in a war we've needed to be in since World War II, and that's, we can get into semantics about that, but, I mean, even on a surface level of looking at shit like shit's halfway on the up and up like you see it, right? You know, there's no reason to go in. I mean, those old fuckers weren't in Vietnam that started it, that wanted us to be over there. So this fight for your country bullshit is really the most nonsensical thing I've ever heard as it applies to Vietnam. Yeah, man, I mean, it ain't... Well, because one guy went, he made his choice. Another guy made his choice to go to Canada. You know, God love both of them. But, I mean, just because one motherfucker went over there, doesn't mean that this other guy should feel guilty and have to go over there. Especially for that bullshit. Really. I mean, this wasn't Hitler trying to take over the fucking world. And like World War II, this was somebody in a hut on an island somewhere out there. Really. I mean, you know, this, and I'm glad people have quit talking about that bullshit about the Vietnam War draft dodger and all that bullshit, you know, but that comes from kind of a chicken hawk type of a mentality of, you know, I remember when Bush was running for president against Gore, you know, the Gore was supposed to be this anti-military guy. Well, even though he was a reporter, he was actually in fucking Vietnam. Bush took 2 deferments to fly around the National Guard in Texas. You see the hypocrisy, though? I mean, really. You know, so I could give a fuck about either one of those two, but the thing is, you know, a lot of people would be like, oh, well, they wouldn't make sense. On one hand, they'd be like, well, Bush is more pro-military than Gore is. But Bush didn't serve over there. He flew around Texas. In 1 year, it's not even accounted for. Yes, Gore was a newspaper reporter over there. That was a big deal. Okay, I get it. But still, he was over there, right? Yeah, you know, but the hypocrisy, it's just that they play it down political lines. But, yeah, it really sounds ignorant. Or calling Bill Clinton a draft dodger because he took a deferment to go to college. You know, like all the leaders' kids did, right? Yeah, you know, the people bitching about it. But yeah, that war there would have been not a motherfucking chance. I would have already had to have been a commissioned officer. What I would have done was, if Canada wasn't available, seen it coming a ways ahead, I probably would have gotten into an ROTC program or, you know, went into something like that. Or if I was already in the military, I wanted to be a military officer, actually, is what I wanted to do growing up. But it didn't work out. You know, it was okay, it worked out okay, but I didn't become a lieutenant like I wanted to. But there ain't no way unless I was already signed up. I mean, what kind of a moron would have gone to Vietnam? I mean, one that didn't think he had any other choice, right? You know, it's people like that. But given the fact that you know it's bullshit, though, and that's the thing, a lot of people didn't realize it was, okay? They were still about God and country because we had just come off of World War II, not even a generation before that, in Korea. And everywhere we're always at, when we're not in war, we're gearing up to go back into one somewhere. I mean, but that's, you know, that's what it is. It's a moneymaker. It's an economy feeder and a moneymaker. You know, but, you know, I even used to hear stupid people be like, oh, well, when we're going to go into the Gulf, Oh, well, good war is good. War is good for the economy. Yeah. Just so your neighborhood getting bombed back into the Stone Age would be really good for the economy too. We could hire a lot of people to come sweep it up and clean up everywhere. Clean your neighborhood, take out the trash. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I don't. It's comical to hear somebody call somebody who didn't go to Vietnam a draft dodger. First of all, it was never even a war. It was never declared a war. It was a police action. And why would I'm trying to? Yeah, I've never heard a logical reason for why anybody would go over there, or would have I mean, if they wanted to, fine. But why would they? What would obligate them to do that? Who would they be defending over there? The Russians weren't coming over here, so it wasn't a worry. And neither were the North Vietnamese. They may be on a diplomatic trip, but yeah, no, it's really shameful. Really shameful that anybody would go that route, right? Yeah, and a lot of misunderstandings during that war, and a lot of people that were rude to the soldiers when they came back home, which wasn't right. So it really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. But people on both opposite ends that didn't understand where the other was coming from. It's you always have a choice, but when you're manipulated by something like your parent, say your old man was in World War II and the whole family was military, and that's just what you've known, and you come from a community like that, of course you're going to feel really pressured to go in there, and you're going to believe that in your heart maybe that it's right. But on the other hand, if somebody didn't want to go, I thank God Canada was up the road. So both had an option, right? There were options. There were ways you could be a conscious objector. Yeah, that got tied up in court, but what would have been worth to you? But the thing about it is we survived it. We've made it through it. Just like with what's going on, things that are going on now. It's always been burning since it's been turning. So I'm not sure what kind of an effect it really had on us. Really, it didn't have any, because we never did learn our lesson. So, but what I think it did was it also happened to be going on during a time where consciousness was raising anyway. So it just kind of a funny parallel, right? I don't think the Vietnam War did anything really per se to raise that consciousness, now that I'm saying about it, right? It was kind of happening anyway. And if it really was something that really would have helped that evolution as much as it should have, it would have yielded more of a result. Like, for instance, 1972 as well, the presidential election, we'll go back to that. All these baby boomers and hippies had campaigned for George McGovern to beat Nixon. They didn't show up at the poll. Nixon, and you'll never have elections this big of a blowout anymore. He won everything but one state. Man, I think he only lost like McGovern's home state, kind of like Reagan did with Mondale in '84. So, I mean, they just didn't show up. Talked a good game, but didn't show up. So hopefully we learn from past generations and we move forward and move on. But yeah, the war. Yeah, I would have really developed a bad heroin habit over there, totally. I mean, just to kind of cope, sure. Yeah, it's probably worse than they think, because that stuff's so addicting. And, you got pains and aches, and it's just like an opiate. It's the same thing. Well, it is the same thing. And plus, as good as it was, didn't have to shoot it necessarily. Feel good. It was real cheap. If not, you could get it fronted to you a lot of the time. From what I understand, it was like that. My cousin's stepdad was over there, and, he was saying the same kind of thing. It was real cheap to get a liter or two of it, or however they bought it over there. So, it was a party central over there, and of course the military kept that kind of a flow open over there to keep those soldiers as happy as they possibly could, at the same time saying that what a real tragedy it was that they were somehow getting a hold of all this shit. And what a sad tragedy for morale. But that's it. Anybody want to come? I've invited people, but I guess people don't want to come on. But yeah, I would just see Clint. Yeah, see what anybody's got to say here. Invite. I don't know what I do. After I hit invite, I don't know what you got to do after that. I just realized the other day, finally, that when you ask to be invited, I didn't know that. I thought that might be TikTok manifest or generating that, and I don't know if there's some other option. I don't know. I'll figure it out one day, though. I know I've got my show that I do with my co-host Carolyn Lanier Roberts. We do a show called Conscious Conversations on YouTube, on one of my YouTube channels every Thursday morning, and we would like to talk to some people on that show because we do simulcast on TikTok as well. So I'm trying to get this quantum computing figured out. Yeah, hi. So I had really two diverse topics to talk about. The other one was going to be about orbs, these angelic orbs, who they are. You know, I've been contacting them on the spiritual realm and from the extraterrestrial realm for about 14 years now. I was going to talk about what they are, but I couldn't tie it into Vietnam. I mean, it'd be a big stretch, you know. I could have made something, come on here and made some shit up like, oh, these orbs were really vital in the pivotal moments of Vietnam, or, you know, they were very key and pivotal moments. They were in Saigon, you know, they were everywhere. They were at the Gulf of Tonkin. It could have been a lot worse if they weren't there, you know. So that's about it. I'm trying to think, I had more notes, but I pretty much covered everything that needs to be covered. The war was a big moneymaker. That's it. It's over with. It's old. Anybody that it possibly could have been in it, even for a spell, would have to be, well, shit, okay. Yeah, you 68 if you were in there at 18 in the last couple of months, but we'll say really, you know, to see anything of any kind of note or relevance, you'd have to be at least 70 right now, at least. So, you know, it's just kind of time heals all wounds, right? There's really not much more we can say about it. But I've tried to invite some people if they've got anything they want to chime in about that wonderful police action that we were involved in. You know, the one that was defending our country. Yeah, defending our country. Yeah, from who? And the thing is who's telling you this? Like, so you're gonna believe some fucking white, crusty fucking leader, even then, man, or leaders, or, you know, senators, congress people, they're trying to get you to go over to war, and they're telling it to you, so it must be the case. Why would that be the case? Why would they know any more than you would know? I mean, as far as having the sense to dictate what was right. They're another human being too. Why would they, you know, I'm sure they're privy to a hell of a lot more information, yeah, but I mean, then what? I'm not going to just take your word for it that there's something you can't talk about. If you can't talk to me about it, well then, okay, then I can't fucking just take your word for it. Fuck. That it's something we need to deal with. I can't talk about it, but it's a big deal. We should go over there. Well, that's great. If you want any kind of cooperation from me, though, I'm going to need to know every fucking thing there is to know about it that you know, and then I'm going to even want to know more. So, yeah, I don't buy into that bullshit. Oh, we can't talk about it. Well, then I can't do anything about it. It's a pretty simple trade-off. And I would never, under any circumstances, on anything, unless I was forced to, but never by choice would I ever take anybody's word for anything at all. I mean, maybe that it's sunny outside if I could, you know, see it beaming through the blinds, but I wouldn't take anybody's word for anything at all. I'd take it under advisement and listen to it, but I wouldn't accept it as some kind of gospel, especially not playing around with my fucking life. You know, especially not playing around with my life. And, yeah, I mean, you know, now if the president wanted to go over there too and fight, good. Himself, but, yeah, I don't know. The World War II generation, though, they were kind of still stuck in that patriotism from the war, World War II, and then they just kind of, they went on about their lives and built families, and their consciousness level just stayed nowhere. They decided that it was at the end of World War II, they decided that, okay, they can kind of coast on autopilot now the rest of the way. They can live that Leave It to Beaver, nothing else going on outside my world type of existence. right? So by the time the flower children came around, they didn't know what the fuck to think, because their minds were not ready to move on. Their mental growth had stunted, fuck, man, 15, 20 years before it even got kicked in. If it would have been up to them, we would have never had anything more than a black and white TV with no remote control. Really. Yeah. Yeah, hard-working generation give you the shirt off their back, but as far as any kind of a consciousness level, zero. Except once in a while I'd run into a few that really knew what the fuck they were talking about as far as on a spiritual level, too. And, they must have really had to bite their tongue a lot coming up in that era, I would imagine, especially, if it was another generation before the baby boomers. Yeah, well, I bet they did, but that's just kind of how it goes, and here we are. So anyway, I've tried to invite people. I don't think it's working, though. I like the way TikTok does shit. I just don't like how censorship... It's funny, they're the most censorship-oriented of any of the platforms, and it's weird, and they get the reputation like they're this bad place to go, or it's evil, and it's... I tell people, no, it's the opposite. You're thinking you're going to go see Saw, and you're going to end up going and seeing Bugs Bunny. I mean, it's not what you think. You don't see any of this weird shit unless you go looking for it either, too. I like the way that quantum computes on here. Now you go through a timeline, you're just going into the live, you're not just clicking on some fucking link on a post, right? They've actually advanced, but my fear is now they're so paranoid about that shutdown they had, right? And I don't blame them, that they're going to the other extreme. It's combination with that and whoever the fuck bought into them, right? I think it's a little bit of both, and so it's not going to be what it could be, but it could be something really great. It's the future of, when the people run the planet, it's the future, kind of a format, the way it goes, versus other platforms. Instagram is a lot like TikTok, but they're kind of, I don't know how I put it. They don't seem as quickly efficient. TikTok's a little bit quicker, it seems to me. A little more quantum. And I really can't explain that any more in depth, but I've tried to get people, that's another thing, to talk about social media as far as what platforms they like. I just use them all for my brand or very little socializing because I don't have the time to do that. But I use about, 20 different, God, I've lost count, who knows, everything that I know but SunCloud, all of them. And, it'd be interesting to see which ones people prefer and why, that use multiple ones, not just maybe one or two. But I use Blue Sky or Lemonade or Threads or, Scoops. Now, Scoops is a cesspool. Scoops is kind of like what people accuse, TikTok of being, but hey, it's a platform, right? It's just like with X, anything else, Quora and Reddit, they're kind of a different breed too. They're a lot like each other, but not really. Kind of like Lemonade, Blue Sky, and Threads are a lot like each other, but they're different in their own ways too, right? So, like Instagram and TikTok are, and then kind of Facebook's kind of on by itself, but TikTok and Instagram are a lot alike. I mean, it seems to me like TikTok has a lot more, I don't know, I know a lot of people that use Instagram and then they're afraid to use TikTok, and they're trying to actually, build a career. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense why they don't use TikTok as well then, too. But they don't, and eventually they'll figure it out, and they'll wonder why they didn't do it a lot sooner. But everything in divine time. So the next time I come on, it'll be about the orbs. I don't know when that'll be. God, it seems like there was so much more I wanted to cover about this war, but there really doesn't need to be anything more said. It was a cool time. The music was good. A lot of people that I know that grew up there then in that era, they had a great time. Unless, they had a really unusually, unless it's the ones I've talked to that had a really unusually fucked up childhood, then, of course, it wasn't that fun for them. But people typically liked living in that era that I've known that are from that era. So, it seemed cool, but I only know it from a nostalgic standpoint. I don't know it from any kind of living or being alive, present in that moment. I know that, I'm sure just like it was with growing up in the 80s and 90s, I'm sure the vibration was of a certain nature then, a lot more denser, versus now. A lot more ignorance, a lot of more closed-mindedness. This is just how it is because we've always done it this way, so this is how we're always going to do it type of mentality, right? And more hung up on a structure than actually the meat of what makes that structure run, like the school, having schools 8 hours a day, just, sitting in a fucking boring bullshit classroom at a desk the same way, not in a circle, like it would be more interactive, right? Just, looking forward and, more hung up on the, and gotta be at the class at this time, gotta be here at this, just more hung up on that shit than they were the actual process of it, right? Of course, it happens. So, that's just kind of what it was like then, and the energy was a lot thicker, and for people that had an open mind, it sucked. So there were other ways to take your mind off of shit, and people did. Yeah. So anyway, well, that's about all I know, man. But I've tried to invite this one last person here, Kojak. Yeah, we got Telly Savalas in the room. Yeah, man, I don't know. It says I'm inviting, but I don't know what the fuck. Now I'm going to have to go read into that, because I thought then once I sent that, the only thing the person would have to do is somehow come into a room. I've never... Well, yeah, I have. The other night I was invited, and when I went in, I can't even remember how in the hell I did it. They invited me, and I stepped into the room. Yeah, I don't know if there's something I'm not hitting. Of course, nobody can tell me anything, I know, because I can't read anything, right, unless I... Unless, there was a feed down here where somebody could talk to me, but all I can do is see when people say hi. Yeah, but I'll figure it out, I'm slow. It took me a couple weeks to figure out how to even X out of one of these. So, you can imagine, I'm slow. Very. It used to be a lot more quick-witted, but I think anybody can say that. Well, man, I don't know. I have no idea how long I've been on, but that's it. The war was bullshit, like any other wars are. It was a moneymaker. It was even sold later on when they finally copped to the truth. When Robert McNamara, it was like I think he was the defense secretary during some of the war. He even had came forward, I don't know, shit in the 90s sometime, and said that the war was wrong, we just didn't know. And even people like my grandmother bought into that too. They were, pro-military. We just didn't know. Well, yeah, you knew. You can't say you didn't fucking know when people were trying to tell you. Whether you seen it, whether you had it happen in your household or not, you saw it on the goddamn 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock fucking news with Walter Cronkite or whoever, Brinkley and Huntley, John Chancellor, whoever the fuck was on at the time. Right? So you knew goddamn good and well. You can't say just because you didn't agree with somebody else that was saying it that you weren't told. You were told. You knew it was a bunch of shit. You knew we were over there. You knew it wasn't fighting off Adolf Hitler, forcing, moving his way through Europe. It was a whole nother kind of a war. It was a proxy war with the Russians. But again, you try to drop that word proxy war, and I'm sure that they would look at you like a deer caught in headlights. All it is when you use two sides. You had the two big superpowers, the Soviets and us, right? And the Brits are close too, but we were using the South, and the Russians were using the North. Yeah, and that's a proxy war. Right, and I would think that was probably the first one. The rest of them, the technology really wasn't there yet to... Well, but then again, I say that, but I'm sure a lot of these chicken shit skirmishes that have went on in countries, revolutions and things like that, I'm sure those were actually... I take back what I said. I'm sure there were a whole shitload of, on the technical sense of it, I'm sure there were a whole shitload of proxy wars, before that, right? Yeah, so, yeah, I can't get this fucking guest thing figured out, though. They're invite. Yeah, man, I don't... And don't let them come in the room, yo. But same thing, I said it before, it's been burning since it's been turning, as far as the planet goes. Okay, yeah, we just really, there isn't, I can't even see an argument that could be made for a conflict we've been in since World War II, and that's, I mean, that thing ended 55 plus 25, that thing ended fucking 80 motherfucking years ago this year. 80 years ago. Since then, Korea, yeah, bullshit. There you go. There's another proxy war. Boy, I really was proven wrong there, man. I'm starting. The Civil War was a goddamn proxy war, actually. So what the hell am I talking about, man? Yeah, man, I'll tell you. Yeah, I was thinking, man, that was the first proxy war. I think what I was thinking, the way I was thinking of it like that is that it was kind of coming into that initial computer age. For that war, I know the weaponry was a little bit more. I think the laser technology was the first. That was the first war that was any kind of a laser weaponry was used. So yeah, it was what it was. And people, of course, always ask the question too: why didn't we just drop? Why didn't we drop the bomb on them? And they weren't going to do that. And that would have been. They just weren't going to do that, right? It would have been not in their best interest to do it, the controllers. It wouldn't have been in their best interest to do something like that over that. They were just over there to get what they could get out of it. They saw a moneymaker. And then they sold a lot of their high level officials on the fact that, okay, we're fighting communism, right? Fighting the Russians, yeah? And they're a problem. I'm not a fan of the Russians, by the way, not at all. And I never have been. To call it the American in me, but I studied a lot of Cold War, or a lot of Soviet propaganda type history, the way they've done shit since they became a country in 1917 when they defeated the Tsar and his ministers, as Mick Jagger would say. Killed the Tsar and his ministers when I saw it was time for change. Yeah, Sympathy for the Devil. That song's about the Illuminati. Yeah, but so I'm not a fan of theirs, and I'm for keeping them in their own little backyard. I'm totally, the U.S. has no right to go poke around everywhere around the world like we do, but I'm all for keeping the Russians in their backyard. All for it. But they're not stupid either, when it comes right down to it. It's different. I might, I'm kind of radical like that. I might consider sending troops over to the Ukraine to make sure they don't make any further headway into the rest of Europe. But, fuck. If they invaded Arundi, Burundi, or, if they invaded Arundi, Burundi, or, my Aunt Ola's, war-torn Angola's, I probably wouldn't think a lot of it, except that, that sucks for them, but, yeah, so that's about it. Alright, I'll try to figure this out, people, if you're listening. I cannot get people in the goddamn room, and it's really driving me nuts, man. We gotta make a blooper tape of me flipping out over it. Yeah, well, anyway, here, we're gonna give it one more good go. It says I've sent invites. I don't know, I'll have to ask this girl. She's got a pretty good channel. I'll plug her channel real quick. Boozer and the Damn Dogs. Her name's Monica Maid. Yeah, well, she does these all the time, so I'm going to ask her how in the hell I came into her room the other night. I don't know. She invited me, and I hit something, and boom, I was there and in the mix. But now I can't. I should have paid attention. I figured it would just come to me this easy. I figured that all I had to do was invite somebody, and they could magically appear, like Frosted Lucky Charms. They're magically delicious. Yeah, they're gonna magically appear. Yeah, well, I don't know why. Now, I see somebody up at the top here. What are they up to? Okay, I'm clicking on that. Let's see. Oh, no, it's just for me to follow somebody. Okay, well, fuck, that sucks. I want somebody to come in and say hi. My first person to ever come in the room and say hi on TikTok. Yeah, fuck. Yeah, there's no PM, so you can't. That's another thing. TikTok ought to invest in some kind of a little PM message thing here where somebody could, like message me instead of me getting on another device and looking in my private messages. Now that's a bridge too far to cross. That I'm way too lazy to go do. I mean, I have like 5 tablets around me and shit, but I'm way too lazy to go over and check the inbox. That would be almost sacrilegious to think of me doing. So, I mean, as wonderful as a person as I am, and I am a pretty wonderful person, I amaze my own self sometimes. Yeah, in fact, I've got an appointment this morning with the mirror. I'm going to be like, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most brilliant at TikTok of them all? And then the mirror will probably crack and go, not you, you ugly bastard. But, and I don't know what this thing is at the beginning where I can get this thing with the hat. So I've said, oh, this TikTok hat looks cool. I was thinking maybe with a certain amount of points I could get a TikTok hat mailed to me, even though I can't wear hats at all. Yeah, even when I worked at McDonald's as a manager in high school, I didn't have to wear one at all, even before I was, because they give me headaches. I'm probably the only person you'll ever meet that has a doctor's note not to wear hats. Yeah, they give me bad headaches, something fierce, migraines, quickly. They're tight, and plus they trap heat onto my head. Yeah, I don't know. But I'm autistic, so I'm weird. Invite the whole, hey, come on, I'll have a ball there. I've invited everybody. Come on, if you got something to say about the war, talk about it. Should we start Vietnam 2? Vietnam 2, return of the, what? Yeah, I saw that was pretty encouraging. I saw their country is united again. I think the whole planet ought to be united, so I don't really get into this fucking coolness of how neat it is that this country, because you're still fucking separated from somebody else. You know what I mean? We need to get more into a we're one planet type of mentality and not this us against them versus us. Same thing, though, every generation. It's us against them, or it's, those people over there, but yeah, but then again, people, you gotta understand, I'm really not from this planet, and I say that in all sincerity, so I couldn't tell you, really. I don't know. I don't understand it, what the deal is. That these people are bad over here, or, without first wondering their environment they're from, without first, okay, because of this and that and everything, and what part of that fucked up equation does your government play in this role, right? Or have historically, right? Even the ones that say, oh, we don't want them here, but yes they do, because they want them for cheap labor for them and shit. So I mean, it is, and besides, we're one planet. It's really not necessarily your fucking sandbox completely over theirs. So it's something to think about. But I guess that's your game. If you want to hate somebody, generalize somebody into a whole fucking category when there's millions of them that are that color or that sex or that identity, or but when in reality is if it were as fucked up as you thought it was, think about how devastating that'd be to the planet if it was really that evil. Oh, but we're keeping it at bay if we let him. Come on, man. Fuck, come on. Anyway, rockin', and I'm out like a trout, and I'll figure this out for next time, and we'll come all, have a ball, and I'll tell you one thing, I'll promise you one thing, we won't be talking about Vietnam unless somebody wants to, if it's in their heart's content to have a fucking story told about Vietnam. I know that on Sundays I'm going to be doing the Reverend Pastor Reverend Lawrence Dean, which is me, Revival Hour. Yes, if you know anybody that needs their soul saved, bring them in front of the parishionership, and we will be saving souls. The Revival Hour will commence, and we'll figure something out. We'll have somebody say 3 hallelujahs in a hut 2, 3, 4, and maybe we can get them on their way. Yeah. And we will have our annual camp out too, the Reverend Larry retreat. We'll have it somewhere when the donations come in. We'll be having it at some really exquisite, I was thinking about it somewhere maybe in New York City, London, Los Angeles, maybe in Toronto. We could have it up on top of a Hilton. We could have a big camp out up on top of the roof and put trees up there, and like we're out really roughing it in the wild. And anyway, when that happens, we will be saving souls many at a time, by the mail, in the bale, by the bale, in the mail. We're gonna save so many souls. It's gonna be incredible. And we're also gonna be doing baptisms in Colt 45, if anybody remembers old Colt 45 malt liquor. Yeah, really good stuff, really high-end stuff. Yeah, we used to get it for about 50 cents a 40 ouncer when I was in high school. Really good stuff, and yeah, you're gonna get baptized in Colt 45, so that'd be really good. You know, come one, come all. And don't worry about donations, man. We take food stamps.